wanted to start my next question with Arjun, and I want to just show you this. I've written this book called Back Home, and in this I talk about why NRIs are so torn about moving to India, and they don't know what that tipping point is. Like, when should you move to India? So the question that I have is, what is the perception of India these days versus 20 years ago for NRIs? And why now? Why do you feel now is a great time for NRIs to consider moving to India? Arjun, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so, if you look at India in the earlier days, when you say 20 years, you probably mean in the earlier days, you couldn't, how many people could get a loan for a house? How many people, or an apartment? How many people could buy a car? There weren't any leases. Interest rates were up at 18% from the bank, 27% if you went to the market. It just wasn't you could have, like, my parents worked their whole life and didn't own a home, right? And that was really what you looked at that time in India. Whereas when you come to the US, you can get a mortgage. In fact, it's cheaper to pay down your mortgage than to rent a place in California, at least. So, it sort of it was a completely different world in the earlier days. Today, it has completely changed in India, number one. Number two, I think what's happened is exactly what Aditya mentioned, is that when mobile phones came in, we had, I think, one landline to some 12,000 people. I forget the number, but it was a crazy number. And today we have more cell phones than we have people. And so I think we just jumped that. We did, the US was slow because they had to recover their investment in landlines, whereas we didn't have any of those problems. And today, if you look at it, I mean, when I talk to my, the guy, Rediwala, who comes to our door to sell vegetables in Delhi, has a phone pay or Paytm or something on his cart, and that's how he wants his money. He doesn't want his money in cash because someone might steal it from him or whatever. So you are seeing, in fact, India in some ways is far more advanced than the US in terms of some of those things. And you are seeing that we talk about the digital divide. I think in some ways, even our so-called illiterate people are over that divide to some extent. But if you don't have the money, India is not a great place for healthcare. You have a lot of problems if you can't afford it. So I think, and I think from a lady's point of view, when I first came here in 1989, just before the big earthquake in California, actually, within 6 months, my wife told me, "You made me an ABCD." And I said, "You can't be. You weren't born in the US. You were born in India." She said, "No, it's Aya, Bera, Cook, Driver. That's what you made me." So think of it. When you talk about quality of life, you can't, there's no comparison. So I think given a choice, look, my daughter's here, but the only reason she's here is that my grandson is borderline autistic, and she thinks that you have better, he'll have a better upbringing here and better support here than he would have in India. Otherwise, you ask her today, in a heartbeat, she'll be back in India. In fact, every holiday we end up spending in India because 2 months in the summer, 1 month in the winter, that's her time. My son gave up his US passport to become an Indian citizen. He is back in India.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, it is, I mean, your quality of life in India is very different. Yes, pollution, there are problems. And everywhere there are problems. In fact, one of the big problems you have in the US today is this whole supremacy thing that's coming up. All these people who seem to think they are superior just because they have a different color. I mean, in California, we are somewhat buffered against it.
Yes.
But in the rest of when we did Headstrong, I moved to Virginia for a few years because our headquarters were there in Fairfax, Virginia. And I actually, in California, I've never felt like an outsider. In Virginia, I was a foreigner.
Hmm.
you know, and it changed over time. I mean, I was there for 7 years. By the time I left Virginia in 2011, it had changed. People started accepting. I mean, you felt you were more acceptable or accepted in that environment. But going from California, it was a big shock. And I guess when you go to the Midwest and you go to places that are, in Tennessee or Kentucky and Alabama or whatever, it's going to be a bigger shock. And I haven't been there. I mean, I
I
visited
lived in
there, but
Alabama, so I can attest to that.
and it's strange. Everyone assumes that people in the US are educated.
Hmm.
Uh, that's not true. A lot of people, not most, a lot of people have not been more than 50 miles away from their home.
Hmm.
Right. It just is, in some ways, it's a strange place. They know a lot of local news, but they have no idea of world news. They have no idea, like, we used to have general knowledge exams and stuff when I was in school. I don't think they do that here. Their knowledge of the world is really, really limited. For a lot of people, again, California is a kind of an exception of parts of at least Northern California where I live in the
Hmm.
Bay Area. But yeah, it's so, I that's the way it is. I never left India, actually, in a
Okay.
way. I've been here for now 20 plus years, 30 years,
Hmm.
so to say, but I've never closed my home in India. I was always going back after 2 years, I'm going back after 1 year, that kind of stuff. So that's been my life.
Physically in the US, mentally in India. Is that how we could call it?
As long as my parents were there, yes, we wanted to go there.
Hmm.
Uh, Now they're gone. It's just, I mean, all my friends are there from school and
Hmm.
college. Not
Hmm.
all, lots of them. And so, as you get older, you find it very difficult to make new friends. If I had come here straight from college, it would have been different. I would have met, people. I would, I came here after working in India for 20 years. It
Hmm.
is completely different.